So it happened. It happened. The US has hit Iran with airstrikes. I, for some reason, didn't think that the US government would do this. I thought that the US government would try and be a bit more, show a bit more restraint, maybe sort of like look to the past and what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, because I see a lot of similarities here. Supposed weapons of mass destruction. You know, like we went in, the US, the UK, the other nations that got involved went in. Turns out there were no weapons of mass destruction, and we all know what happened there. So I'm just hoping that this isn't going to be a similar conflict to that. You know, I'm hoping this will be the end of it, but realistically, it probably will not be. Um, yeah, I mean, I just want to know, because I thought that the nuclear facilities, the enrichment facilities that Iran had, were really deep, deep, deep underground, like underneath mountains. So I wonder how effective these airstrikes were. Like, have they really been able to take out all of the nuclear enrichment facilities? Or, you know, are they still, Iran still enriching, uranium?
Overnight, the United States carried out a historic operation with
Wow,
aircraft
the
striking
B2.
3 Iranian nuclear facilities during Operation Midnight Hammer. Now, this appears to be the longest B-2 strike operation since 2001, and from what we know so far, all munitions impacted on target, and the Iranian
Okay.
military did not detect or fire upon our aircraft while they were overhead. So today we're going to get into what we know so far about the details of this operation, what it means for the Iranian nuclear program going forward, and what to expect in terms of an Iranian response. Now, shortly after the aircraft safely departed Iranian airspace, President Trump addressed the nation. Let's play a clip of that.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
And then just a few moments ago, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Kane wrapped up a Pentagon press conference where they went into further detail of this operation. A couple key components here. First off, again, this was named Operation Midnight Hammer, and they said this was highly classified, with very few people in D.C. even knowing the details of the plan.
I mean, realistically, like Iran, they've got a really difficult choice to make now, because, they've just been hit, right? Do they retaliate? If they retaliate, I mean, this gets way worse for them. But then if they don't retaliate, like, they're going to be thinking, the anger might, produce a kind of like ISIS type group of like really hardcore militants, which is kind of what we saw happen, in the original Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts and wars. It's a really, really difficult choice now, like, because there will be people who lost their lives in these strikes, and their families and stuff. They're going to be obviously angry. So I wonder what's going to follow this.
There was a deception aspect of this where decoys were sent west, and this is a topic we discussed in yesterday's video, as it appeared the United States was moving assets into the region to begin strikes, or at least threaten strikes against Iran. Those B-2 bombers moving west were highly visible and being tracked across a bunch of media and open source intelligence platforms. That was a decoy. Meanwhile, 7 B-2 bombers took off from the United States flying east. They moved east with minimal comms for the 18-hour flight and conducted multiple refueling throughout the operation. Once those aircraft heading east were over land, they linked up with escort aircraft, United States escort aircraft, from everything I can tell at this point. The secretary did get a question about the involvement of the Israeli military, and he made clear that this was a United States-led and conducted attack. Although there was deconfliction with Israel as we were moving through the region, it does not appear that Israel played any part in this specific operation, at least the operational aspect of this operation.
I mean, though, would America have done this if not for potential, like Netanyahu constantly saying Iran are, close to developing their own nukes? You know, I would probably bet no. So if I had to put money on if Israel were involved in this operation, at least in terms of intelligence, I'd probably say yeah. What do you think?
Now, in terms of the timelines here, it was orchestrated to where the targets, 3 different nuclear facilities, Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo, appear to have been hit with Tomahawk land attack missiles from a U.S. submarine stationed in the region before and after the airstrikes were complete. So they say at 12:30 a.m. Iran time, a U.S. submarine launched 24 T-LAMs, Tomahawk land attack missiles, against key targets at Isfahan. And we did start to get these reports last night, as there were scattered reports of guard towers and random explosions around some of these nuclear facilities. Shortly thereafter that, U.S. aircraft, 4th and 5th generation fighters, moved into Iranian airspace and began preemptive strikes against Iranian surface-to-air threats. There were no, according to the United States, and I'm not hearing anything contradicting this from Iranian media, no shots fired at all from the ground, from surface-to-air missiles or surface-to-air cannons against the U.S. aircraft during the course of this suppression and or destruction of the Iranian air defense.
Wow, that's a lot of restraint from Iran. I mean, smart, honestly, smart, because if they started, fighting back, I think the US would have just annihilated them. So, yeah, very smart decision, I think. It would have taken a lot of restraint. It'd be like somebody, punching down at you, someone bigger and stronger than you, and you not just allowing it to happen because you know that if you make them angry, they're going to just hit you even harder.
Then at 2:10 a.m., the first 2 GBU-57s, those are the massive ordnance penetrators, the deep bunker buster bombs, the 30,000-pound bombs that we talked about in yesterday's video. 2:10 a.m. time in Iran, 2:10 local time in Iran, the first 2 impacted their desired aim point at Fordo. And we do have some imagery showing what this looks like. Fair warning, it's going to be underwhelming because it just kind of shows up as some holes in the ground. The Pentagon says in total, 14 of these massive ordnance penetrators were dropped against 3 different nuclear target areas. And it appears that at least a couple of these sites, there were multiple target impact points. So to be very, very precise, and you'll see these holes going one after the other after the other. And it wasn't just being dropped against a mountainside. There were specific locations being targeted. The Pentagon said that between 2:10 a.m. at the first point of impact and 2:35 a.m., all targets were struck. 2:10 a.m. to 2:35 a.m. So in a 25-minute window, the 3 most sensitive Iranian nuclear sites were hit with 14 of these large bunker buster munitions. They say that overall, 75 precision-guided munitions were used during the operation, and they stressed that this was the first operational use of the GBU-57. They added that during the course of this operation, the Iranian Air Force did not fly at all. There were no indications that they took off trying to interdict. There were no surface-to-air missiles that were fired at U.S. aircraft, and as far as we can tell, the U.S. aircraft overhead were not picked up, were not identified, were not detected by Iran at all. Which,
guys, what do you think though? What do you think about this? Because, Iran, has never, to my knowledge at least, they've never used a nuke. They've never had a nuke. In terms of, attacks and stuff, it was Israel that preemptively struck them first, which has led to this, barrage of Iranian ballistic missiles, them firing back at Israel. What do you think? Are you in support of this act from the US government? Or do you think, why has the US got involved here? Why couldn't they have just let this be an Iran versus Israel type situation? What do you guys think? Eager to know your thoughts.
Should be concerning for Iran and any of their allies that use similar air defense assets. Now, during the question and answer portion of this briefing, General Kane was pushed on the battle damage assessment, something we're going to go into more detail here in a moment. But he said, quote, "I know that battle damage is of great interest. Final battle damage will take some time, but initial battle damage assessments indicate that all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. And that's an important aspect, the way that he addressed it here, saying, be careful, be cautious. It's going to take a while to get to this full assessment. What we have right now, some satellite imagery showing the aftermath of these strikes, again, I think is going to be underwhelming because you're just seeing holes in the ground. This is different than a radar location that was there yesterday and is not there today. And there's certainly been some of that battle damage assessment in Iran already, but not as it relates to the U.S. strikes. Again, the reason that the United States was involved here was the use of these massive ordnance penetrators to strike aspects of the Fordow and Natanz nuclear facility that were 30, 60, 90, or excuse me, some 200 to 300 feet below ground.
Wow, 300 feet below ground. That is so deep. Wow, that is insane. I mean, to think that the US has, like, ordnance that can actually delve that deep underground and then explode is crazy. Like that's takes a big bomb to be able to do that.
So when you look at this imagery here, you can certainly see some of the entry points, but there's no indications from above ground that we can see at this point to show any sort of effects on targets. There does appear to be some dirt thrown over some of the entrances to a couple of these different facilities, but at the same time, there were also tomahawks used, likely against some of the entrances. So it's not clear if that was... We did see some pictures of Iran trying to cover up some of the entrances in recent days. Hard to tell. Again, a lot of this right now is going to be based on, quite frankly, do you trust the assessment of the U.S. military and what we may or may not get out of Israel?
This is it. Like, there's no way to know the success of this because Iran's never going to take photos of the damage and send them to the US. Like, so there's no real way to know. Radar, maybe? Radar imagery, maybe?
Related to this as well. Because when you look at these overhead images, you're not going to see the collapsing of structures to the inside, and you're also not seeing any smoke emanating from the underground facilities. So yes, munitions impacted where they wanted them to hit. Did they actually make it all the way down into the facility? If so, did they destroy much of the facility? That is, to be blunt, it's a lot of speculation at this point and a matter of trust. Do you trust the people that are saying, yes, a lot of things were destroyed? Now, to that end, I think it's worth looking at some of the Iranian statements so far. Of course, we're not going to have, and we should not expect, any real footage off the ground anytime soon. Remember, especially at Fordow and a portion of Natanz, these were secretly built facilities. We don't, to my knowledge, have any footage or pictures or anything from inside of these locations.
And this is the thing, like, who's to say that Iran doesn't have other nuclear enrichment facilities? Like, who's to say that they must have known that these facilities were under threat. So any smart country would probably, replicate these facilities in various places. But then I suppose, could you not maybe track the uranium? Is there a way to detect like uranium, like some kind of test you can do to see where it's being like enriched and stuff? Because yeah, surely this isn't the 3 that were mentioned by Trump aren't the only enrichment sites.
There's no reason that Iran would release this now. Now, when looking at the Iranian statements, kind of assessing what actually played out here, it changed a bit over time, as to be expected. It started out with denial, saying there were no explosions in the areas that the U.S. was reporting, that this was just a bluff and that this operation did not take place. Over time, we started to see more confirmation from official sources in Iran that, yes, these attacks did take place, but what it actually means is still kind of being disputed. Again, recognizing that Iran has no incentive to come out and say the U.S. strikes were incredibly effective. They did everything and more that they were hoping to do. So we have a statement here from Mehdi Mohammadi, who's a senior advisor to the Speaker of Iran's
okay. So there are more. Parliament,
who said that the locations were hit, but, quote, did not sustain any irreversible damage in the strike. That's about as specific as we're getting from anybody at this point. By and large, the majority of the statements coming out of Iran right now are just upset that the U.S. carried these out and threatening retaliation. Another key note here is we do have satellite imagery showing a line of trucks appearing at Fordow in recent days, and there have been some in Iran saying that they were able to evacuate the people, first of all, that were working at Fordo, but also some of the materials. And depending on which source you look at this, some are suggesting that means the already highly enriched uranium.
Has been
Others
moved.
are talking about more of the technology. Look, I don't know what you can or cannot fit in the back of some of these open bed pickup trucks, but
Because what happens now? What happens now if the US or Israel, figure out that the enrichment hasn't really been stopped or affected, like Iran's enrichment? Does does the US have to strike again? Like, does the US have to go again and again and again? Or is this a one-off thing? I would hope this is a one-off thing, because if not, what's going to happen is, the US's adversaries like Russia, China, potentially, they are going to, keep like backing Iran secretly, selling weapons, etc., etc. And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And God forbid, I don't want to sound a lot alarmist, but this is kind of how major wars start. They usually start small and, escalate quite quickly. I'm hoping this is a one-off. What do you think?
the appearance of these trucks does line up with previous Iranian statements of moving some things out of Fordo, which should not be surprising. In fact, we should expect that as tensions have escalated in recent days, that Iran likely did their best to disperse whatever they could away from these fixed locations that were coming under increased U.S. and Israeli scrutiny. Now, the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran did put out a statement as well, saying, quote, "We will not allow the development of this national industry to be halted." So standing firm, saying, yes, these strikes occurred. We are not going to stop the enrichment of uranium. We are not going to stop the development of our nuclear program. And to that end, I think it's worth addressing some claims we're already seeing here, regardless of the effectiveness of these strikes, whether these strikes completely destroyed everything underground and there's nothing, they've been completely caved in, or if they, let's go with that. Let's say they were 100% effective. Even that does not mean that the Iranian nuclear program is gone. And I think you saw this a little bit earlier where President Trump said that everything has been obliterated. And then when General Kane was asked a similar question about battle damage assessment, he said it's going to take some time, but it looks like there was severe damage. And the reason for that is we're kind of talking about two different things here. The facility can sustain severe damage. The facility can be completely destroyed. That is only one aspect of the Iranian nuclear program. So digging into this a little bit further, Iran already has highly enriched uranium on around 60%. To get that to weapons grade around 90% only requires a small number of advanced centrifuges, which could be hidden elsewhere around the country.
This is it. There's just no way of knowing Iran's true capabilities and what they possess in terms of like nuclear technology. There's just no way to know. Like even if, there are spies within the Iranian regime and the, scientific teams, like that information, like the real sort of critical stuff is probably really well guarded, like really well guarded. Only like a few people like knowing everything. So there's just no way to know, like, even if these strikes were effective, did it really slow Iran down? We don't know. Maybe, maybe not.
Keep in mind, these underground facilities were secret. The fact that they were being built was a secret. What they were doing there was a secret. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Iran has other facilities somewhere in the country where they have some centrifuges that could assist with the further enrichment of uranium. They also already have that 60% enriched uranium in some locations. There's been no indication, no verification at this point that that in itself has been destroyed. That 60% would be enough, more than enough, for Iran to utilize some sort of dirty bomb, spreading radioactive material over a wide area, which...
The thing is, I don't think Iran would do that, though. They just wouldn't. I just don't think any smart country would do that, because mutually assured destruction, they would get nuked back, and then it would just be, the end of the world. Like, I just don't think they're dumb enough to use a nuke.
Is important because we are still seeing today that Iranian missiles are able to get through Israeli air defense. Just a few hours ago, there were some pretty significant impacts in Tel Aviv. So Iran has a significant missile arsenal. They are showing the ability to penetrate complex air defense networks. If they were to incorporate in a dirty bomb, they do have that ability right now with the uranium they have on hand. Additionally, materials, right? So destroying everything that Iran has on hand does not mean that they can't build it again in the future, can't import it from friendly nations again in the future. We have already started to see Israel go after some of the centrifuge facilities and some of the missile production facilities. So moving down the target list to things that could be used by Iran to try to rebuild these capabilities down the road. But that's something to keep in mind. They were able to develop these on their own or with the assistance of some allies. There's no reason they wouldn't be able to do this again starting now. So the nuclear program theoretically could be pushed back. But again, looking at the destruction of one facility does not mean the total destruction of the program. And of course,
And for sure, it might even incentivize them to go quicker, to devote more of their like resources and finances to getting like full nuclear capabilities. I really hope that this doesn't look like it's like add fuel to the fire, if you know what I mean. I just want peace, man. I just want us all to get along.
of course, the big piece here that we've talked about quite a bit is the knowledge base. Now, Israel has done a pretty significant dent, has made a pretty significant dent in that knowledge base, killing at least, I want to say, 15 of the top nuclear scientists. So, again, the example that I've heard regularly is if Germany were to go back or Japan were to go back and eliminate Oppenheimer the months leading up to the Trinity test, it would significantly set back the U.S. nuclear weapons program or atomic weapons program, but it wouldn't stop it entirely. And that's kind of what we're looking at here with the knowledge base across Iran. The elimination of those scientists certainly means it's going to take a lot longer, even if they started today, to get back to where they were. But there is still a lot of knowledge spread across Iran with a lot of their, especially a lot of their government, but a lot of their scientists as well, to get back to where they were today unless something more is done. Now, turning to the Iranian response and what we might expect here going forward, I want to real quick, just want to harp on that. I think there's a lot of, I'm seeing a lot of celebration, a lot of joy, a lot of we did it, mission accomplished type stuff. And I don't want to be, a party pooper here, but there's a lot more to be done still. This is still very, very early on. There's still the possibility that this gets turned into a broader conflict with the United States having more involvement in the Middle East and
which is just not what we need, man. Like do you Americans watching this, do you really have, the appetite for another war in the Middle East? Not again. Not again. Like, we literally just ended one. Like, literally, what was it, last year? When the last troops left Iraq and Afghanistan. Like, we've seen this movie already, We've seen this before.
Iranian nuclear program is not gone yet. I am personally concerned about the spread of some of this material. So again, if you go back, pick a time frame, whether it was weeks, months, or maybe years ago, where Iran likely had consolidated a lot of their enriched uranium and centrifuge facilities in certain locations. And if we had hit them all at that one point without Iran having any notification ahead of time or any thought that was coming, it was a higher likelihood of removing this program. As time has gone on, and especially over the last week, as Israel has been carrying out strikes against these nuclear facilities, there's a real chance that Iran has dispersed a lot of whatever they can across the country. That makes me nervous, and it's an unknown, if you will, right? We don't know.
Why does it make him so nervous? Like, does he really think Iran is going to start a nuclear war? Like, it's not going to happen. Even if Iran can develop 5 nukes, right? 10 nukes even. The US has what, like 6,000? It's just not going to, they are not going to start a nuclear war against, Israel or the United States. So I think there's a little bit of hysteria. There's a little bit of like panic about Iran. I think that is, in my opinion, somewhat unjustified. I don't think Iran are that dumb. I just don't think they are that stupid.
If they dispersed anything, we don't know what they dispersed. If they did, then we certainly don't know where it is. But that is something in the back of my mind as we see some of the celebrations of this, what was, and I want to stress, a very, very successful operation. Now, turning to the Iranian response and what we might expect here, we knew that something likely would come of this. President Trump right away last night issued a statement saying, quote, "Any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight." And we have seen an increase in U.S. military assets in the region. Just a few weeks ago, we saw that the United States was moving some of our ground-based or our surface-to-air rockets that we thought were going to Ukraine instead went to Air Force bases in the Middle East to protect against Iranian drones. We're seeing that across the region, and I would expect that all of our bases, all of our facilities within Iranian missile range are on high alert. They have the capabilities to defend themselves. That said, Iran and their proxies.
Again, Iran would never, I don't think they would ever attack a US military base. That would just be like, it would be SUICIDE, basically. They would get wrecked. Like,
these do pose a threat to U.S. service members and U.S. interests in the region. The IRGC came out and said, quote, "Today's aggression by the U.S. terrorist regime has led the Islamic Republic of Iran, within the framework of its legitimate right to self-defense, to use options beyond the understanding and calculations of the aggressor front. And the aggressors of this land must expect regrettable responses." Now, there's a couple components when looking at what Iran might do here that need to be considered. The first and foremost are direct missile launches from Iran. Again, go back to when Trump authorized the elimination of Qasem Soleimani in 2020. Anyways, in that elimination, we saw Iran respond directly. There was a lot of looking at their proxies, seeing if some of their allied forces in the region would try to do something. But Iran wanted to send a message in that case, so they fired missiles from their own territory against U.S. bases in Iraq. We have to keep an eye out for that. And what's notable right now is while we are seeing a decrease in numbers of missiles launched against Israel day in and day out, we are starting to see some get through, arguably more get through than were in earlier waves. Iran, for their part, is saying they're using some of their more advanced weaponry right now. Whether or not that's actually the case, those are their long-range munitions. Iran has, and this is a great graphic here.
Do you guys ever think there's going to be peace in the Middle East? Like, at least within our lifetimes? Because it just feels like there's constantly something going on there, like constantly.
From FDD, your Foundation for Defensive Democracies, that shows the ranges and the types of Iranian missiles. There are a lot of U.S. bases in the region that are well within range of some of Iran's short and medium range missiles. Those are ones that cannot reach Israel. And there's no indication right now that they are running low on some of those shorter range munitions. So we have to keep that in mind. Another big one here is Iran trying to close the Strait of Hormuz. Alongside that, they've threatened in recent days that they would have the Houthis shut down the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, so two major shipping hubs here. Now, any sort of shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz, which historically has been done with naval warships and mines, but I would argue right now could probably be done with drones more effectively. This would be one of the most destabilizing acts that Iran could carry out, short of actually utilizing some sort of dirty bomb or crude nuclear weapon. It's a very, very high-risk move. It would severely damage the Iranian economy and the Iranian state, but if they really feel like they're backed into a corner, which I don't think is out of the question right now, this is a route they could pursue. Now, turning to their proxy forces across the region, all eyes are kind of on the Houthis right now. I would argue, of all of the Iranian proxies, this is the group that has maintained the most capability to inflict damage on the United States, Israel, and or others. Real quick, kind of running through those historic proxies. The Assad regime in Syria, of course, is no longer. They're gone. Hamas in Gaza, preoccupied with Israeli forces right now. Hezbollah, maybe. They would have been at the top of the list in terms of firepower just a few short months ago. They've been dealt a pretty significant blow by Israel, and it seems like they're waffling a bit in terms of desire to actually get involved here. And their attacks, again, most likely would be against Israel, not necessarily the United States. The Houthis down in Yemen are a big one, and they just put out a statement the other day saying if the United States, yesterday actually, if the United States gets involved in an attack and aggression against Iran with the Israeli enemy, the armed forces will target its ships and warships in the Red Sea.
Wow, okay, that's a pretty direct threat.
A member of their political bureau, Mohammed al-Bakidi, also put out a statement saying, quote, "We are ready to confront America if it participates in the aggression against Iran." The Houthis, for their part, awful organization, death to America, death to Israel, all that stuff, curse be upon the Jews, is on their flag, right? So this is their motto. They have been pretty consistent in following through with their threats in recent years. So I would expect some sort of attack by the Houthis against U.S. military forces in the Red Sea and or the the Gulf of Aden. Then turning to the proxy forces in Iraq and Syria, there has been a drawdown of U.S. forces in Syria recently. We do still have a significant element in Iraq. One of those groups, again, the probably most well-equipped, largest group of the Iranian proxies here, Kataib Hezbollah, issued a statement just 2 days ago saying, quote, "We affirm and more clearly that if the United States enters the war, the idiot Trump will lose all the trillions he dreams of seizing in the region. Without a doubt, America's bases in the region will turn into duck hunting grounds. The Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb Strait will be closed, and the oil ports in the Red Sea will cease operations."
Man, look, I just really, really hope this doesn't explode into a much larger conflict. It might be unrealistic of me, but you know, Iran retaliating against this, against the US, would just see further destruction on them unless they secretly have, really advanced weaponry, really advanced aircraft and etc. Like Iran against the US only ends one way. Like, so for them, yeah, it would require a ton of restraint, but the smart thing for them to do would be to not retaliate. On the US's from the US perspective, I would hope this is the limit of the US's involvement in this, because I just think with the amount of money spent on the Iraq war and the war in Afghanistan, and the troops that were lost and maimed so horribly, like I would think that the appetite for another potential large Middle East conflict is probably really low among the people of the US. Like Americans watching this, if you had to rate your appetite from 1 to 10, your appetite for getting involved in another big skirmish in the Middle East, what is it? I would estimate on average it's probably like a 3, because it costs a huge amount of money. It costs lives, resources that are better spent on domestic issues. Like spend that money on infrastructure, spend that money on, there's a million things you could spend that on domestically. Student loan forgiveness, I don't know, you pick pick your choice. But yeah, I'm just hoping this doesn't escalate into something much bigger. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.